So once we know that if that is the goal, okay, the other thing I want to point out besides adding incrementality, you should realize that your retail grocery store, from our perspective as a seller, when we are talking to a grocery store buyer, we want them to buy our product. We want them to be excited about it. Wow, it's going to do so well. It would change our life if we are an emerging brand, if they bought our product, and it would help us to get bigger market share if we're already established. But from a grocery store's perspective, they also see it as a high risk to take your product and put it on their shelf. They have to not only add it into their system, they have to buy inventory, they have to manage it at their warehouse, they have to train their staff and figure out where to put it on the shelf. They have to move something else that's already selling on the shelf to be able to put your product there, which means that they could possibly lose the incrementality or the sales velocity that they currently have on the shelf. So from their perspective, the grocery store in general is trying to maximize total sales, and the individual buyer is trying to maximize the number of products that they're selling in their aisle, in their category, because usually a category buyer within a larger grocery chain is assigned to certain categories. So they might manage dry goods, they might manage fresh foods, because that allows them to really understand and manage that area. And so when you're speaking to them, you need to understand that their bonus, their ability to exist as a grocery store, their profit margins are dependent upon taking bad products or good products. And so your constant awareness needs to be, how can I help them to succeed as a retail buyer? How can I show that my product is better than the ones they're currently selling? And that way they have an incentive to move and remove items that are low sales velocity products and replace them with yours that hopefully will increase their bottom line. So remember that is what you always in a sales pitch want to understand and communicate the benefit to the end user. How can I help you to succeed in your goals? If you can communicate a win-win, show your product is succeeding, you're going to get better sales. So let's understand the techniques that grocery store retail buyers can use to be able to actually optimize their sales. And if you understand these things, then you can speak to your retail buyer about that and kind of pitch ideas. B, you can study these things when you're walking in grocery stores to understand your category before you design your structure or visual packaging. C, you really will understand what the competition is doing and what's succeeding so that you can make changes in a lot of other areas. And I'll show you what those other areas are. But when you're innovating new products, if you understand what sells, it will empower you to be able to do a better job of building your whole business. So again, to come here to the merchandising techniques, the first thing you need to understand is that the shelves have different visibility. Top shelf, if you're standing here, your line of sight without a lot of movement as you're walking around the store is right here. And so the average person, can see the second and third shelves from the top, and that's a bullseye zone. That's where you'll find the highest selling products. That's where we all would like to be, and you'll notice that that's what people do. The top shelf are usually the smaller brands, regional brands, gourmet brands, because they have lower sales velocity, but people, you'll notice that that's what grocery store buyers choose to place products there. The bottom of the shelf is obviously the heavier products. Sometimes they'll put private label brands there if it's for commodity items, but usually it's because they have it's just heavier. The heavier products usually go down there. And then there's obviously kids' eye levels especially in the grocery store, you'll see that there's a lot of packaging and things placed specifically to target children that are usually bright colors in that category, because that's where little kids get to see things. You want to obviously try to become a product that can be in the bullseye zone, but how do you do that? You need to understand that the best selling products are there and find ways to compete with the best sellers. So we'll go into what those things could be. The other thing that you would want to know besides vertical planning, there is a horizontal plan, because people usually look from left to right. And I didn't get any data on whether or not that's true in China, where they read right to left, but in America anyway, we read left to right. And so if the traffic of the store if you're walking in on the left-hand side of the store, they're going to be circling around the right. And so the sales velocity is always going to be the highest in the, on the left-hand side, where people are when they're first walking up. So even when you're thinking through the aisle, the store, when you're at checkout, the products that are at checkout on the left-hand side actually have higher sales velocity, and therefore need to have the right margins to support it, compared to the products on the right. So you want to start walking through grocery stores and you're going to see all these things. It's very, very interesting. The other thing to note is that the grocery store products, that the dairy and frozen kind of gets 15% in terms of total sales. The deli is about 4%. And inner aisles, which is the largest. So this is a confusing statistic because a lot of times the inner aisles are not as fast moving as a lot of the outer ones. The end caps are the highest. End caps and checkout are the highest sales velocity places on a planogram. So if your product is in the center of the store, you may not get noticed as easily because people don't go through every single aisle in the center of the store. They go from the outside and they go through checkout. So if your product is in the center of the store, your question to yourself could be, how do I try to get into the best shelves on a, like the 2 to 3 tier bullseye zone on the shelves? How do I get on the outer perimeter? How can I grab people's attention in those categories when they're first walking in? So then we have the other merchandising techniques that people use are slotting fees. So because it's so expensive for grocery store buyers to actually place products on the shelf, they sometimes will charge a fee specifically to take their energy and time and all that admin work to get your product set up and have you placed on the shelf. And I've seen slotting fees between $800 and $2,500 per SKU, which means it's literally a charge that to have your product on the shelf. Other types of slotting fees that might influence their placement decision would be something like a free fill. So if you're a brand new emerging brand, they might ask you to place new products on the shelf and give it to them for free because it's the risk that they take to have to inventory your product. And so that's one way that you can influence their decisions. And promotional dollars. So like saying that you're going to pay for marketing, for ad spend, or for little discount tags that can influence their decision to put you on the shelf because you're supporting their sales velocity. Other merchandising techniques that influence their placement decision is color. So obviously, the contrasting of color and the ability of your product specifically to stand out either between your brand family or with other products that are on the shelf like your competition. Merchandising techniques that they will use is oftentimes to color block, to take products that are from different competing brands and actually place them next to each other if they create contrast, because people's eyes and attention are really drawn towards color contrast. And here's a really great example of how color play in a very saturated market like juice and kombucha has been stacked and designed to be able to grab attention. You can see that all the brands' family products are all placed together, but the play and the contrast of the color is very important. Even choosing which of your products, let's say, your purple, red, green, and orange, them placing your products together, they aren't going to place 2 green products next to each other. That's not as good of an idea as placing some kind of color contrast, which causes your eye to draw attention to it. So you want to have color contrast within your own product, and you also want to understand what else is on the market so that you can create color contrast there so that you're unique compared to the other people in your category. Other things that merchandising techniques that retail buyers use would be clumping things by theme. So the end cap, which is at the end of the grocery store aisle, they will oftentimes bulk things together based on whatever the season is. So I'm sure you're seeing that this season for summer products. You can see that there's sunscreen, there's a towel, there's soda, because a person is going to make an impulse buying decision. So they need to understand. The retail buyer is actually trying to grab their attention by reminding them, hey, if you're going to the pool, you're probably going to want these things. So if you have products and you can strategize products that go well with seasonal themes, you might help your buyer to create an experience where they can increase incremental sales volume by combining products together. So even if your product is a low velocity product, if you can pair it with one, if you can argue that it should be paired well with a higher sales velocity product, you can help the retail buyer understand where else and influence their placement decisions. So a good sales pitch should explain how they can use your product during different seasons, how they might be able to pair products with complementary products that are either competitors or ones that aren't even in your category, but that really would belong well together. And this one is an example of, this is me at Whole Foods. You can see that they did chips and soda. Other merchandising techniques that work is something called framing with circles, squares, brackets, where you're using color or shapes to draw attention to a person's product. And you probably saw this back here, how a lot of these products have circles, frames of these colors. Like if you don't really know what these brands are, it's not close enough to your face to be able to see it, but you can tell which brands really stand out because of the way that they're using this color. And obviously GT right here is dominating. They really have used the frame well. Up here is, I cannot remember the name of the orange brand, but the orange in the very center serves as a target for your eye, causing you to want to, stare at that product, and it grabs your attention. So when you're designing graphically, you want to keep these things in mind. Here are some more examples of these types of merchandising techniques where you use a frame to draw your attention to the product. Simple Truth, like the first thing that you see here is their logo. You can see that the circle technique here in Archer Farms is drawing you towards their brand. You really don't notice the other product on the top left because it doesn't have those little circles. The circles draw you in. So keeping this in mind, that, and this is another example with the nut thins, you can see that they created a frame with color and it draws your attention, forces your eye to stare at the words nut thins. It's actually easier to read and to see than the Archer Farms Simply Balanced Target brand down below, because the colors are not as bold and the circles are really dark that match the actual background packaging. So keep this type of thing in mind as you're designing packaging artwork, that using frames will help your product to look really good and will cause retail buyers to want to display your product. Other merchandising techniques that I think are wildly interesting is the serving size and the use, that diversifying the structural packaging that you're using to accommodate different serving sizes and product use can have on your product. And we'll go into some awesome case studies in a second, but it's wild that this is an example of how you could take a product. Let's say it's a cheese stick, a cheese, you're a cheese brand. You could be doing cheese sticks, but you could also do many tiny serving sizes for moms who maybe are, and dads who are packing lunches. You could do little tiny clusters like cheese crumbles that you're going to pour out from bags into salads. You might even do it an individual serving size that maybe is a little bit larger for adults who are maybe going on a bike ride and they want to be able to have some kind of a source of protein. And lastly, you might want to do tubs. And if you did smaller tubs that have spreads, lower ones for parties, and then even bigger ones maybe for everyday spreading on sandwiches, you can see right here, just by changing the structure of your packaging, you've redefined all the different places that your product could be placed and given a buyer an excuse, removed the excuse to be able to not carry your product, because there's so many different ways that your product could be displayed in their stores to serve customers and grab new market share. Other things that you can do would be to figure out and define different point of purchase displays and exterior, secondary, tertiary packaging that helps to display your product in multiple places on the shelf or in the store. So you can imagine if you have a point of purchase display, this little box comes pre-packed with your product. It means that you can not only be placed on the shelf, but you can also be placed in a different, odd, random place in other aisles, perhaps placed next to things that make sense seasonally. So if you're doing a soda brand, you might be also placed next to the really fun, exciting aisles like the pool seasonal aisle where they have all the pool toys. If you have thought through exciting point of purchase displays, you're giving your buyer an excuse to think through your product being placed in multiple spots. Other things are making a plan and setting aside dollars that you're planning to pay the grocery store to support the sales of your product. So if you have a merchandising plan and a budget set in place where you're going to help pay for either discounts or for ad spend in their circular, you're showing that you're making great effort to be able to support the success of your product and drive customers to actually make incremental purchases of your product. Other things that I've heard buyers say, if I've heard them ask things like, hey, are you doing any social media push? Are you trying to do anything to get people to come into stores or to know where to be able to buy your product, especially if you're an emerging brand? And having some kind of a plan like, hey, we have a podcast. Hey, we have a celebrity endorsement. Hey, we're going to be handing out product at the beach in Pacific Beach on these days during high traffic seasons and we will tell them to go to your grocery store. That's really powerful for most grocery stores because, again, they're taking a risk to carry your product and they want to know that you're going to support their sales success.